So welcome back everybody. I hope you're all having a great weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks today. In this video, well, I'm hoping to be able to get these support knees mounted underneath these side decks. Now, if you've missed the previous videos where I was going ahead and doing the templating and then cutting these out with the coosa and then glassing them over, I'll put a link for that video right up in here. And with that said, let's get started. So the first thing I need to do before I can really epoxy anything in place is I need to come over each location where each of the knees are going to be located and basically clean them up, grind them down, scuff up the surface so that the epoxy that I'm going to be using for bonding the knees in place is going to actually have some tooth to kind of bite onto. And to do that, there's a few ways that I could tackle this. If I wanted to, I could actually just use a regular old grinder, like a high-speed grinder. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know I don't really like using those just because they make such a mess. And inside of a building especially, I don't want all that glass floating around here for the next 4 or 5 months. So I rarely ever use those. Now, the other option that I could use is my little belt sander. Now, I love that thing, and that would work very well for something like this, just because it's such a small profile. It would give me a lot of control, and as far as dust control, it works very well. Now, what I'm going to go with is it's the Festool. It's the RAS 115, I believe, which is kind of a bit of a hybrid between those two things. It rotates somewhat like a grinder, but it's not high speed. I can dial that thing down to a nice slow revolution, and it's got built-in dust extraction. So that works very well. I used it before when I was tearing apart this cockpit area. It worked fantastic. So as you can see here, I ended up grinding an area that's quite a bit larger than what I actually need, at least for mounting the actual knee itself. And the reason for doing that is that after this knee is installed and the epoxy, at least the initial epoxy for holding it in place, has cured, then I'm going to be wanting to come in and basically apply some tabbing to either side of the knee, essentially bonding the knee then to the side of the hull. So now one thing I should mention, and I'm not quite sure why I forgot about this a minute ago, but as far as different options or things that you can use for grinding or sanding this down, if all you happen to have is a sander, whether it's a 5 or a 6-inch sander, just a regular old sander, that would work for doing this perfectly well. And it'll take a little bit longer, but it'll still get the job done. But I chose to go with the Festool just because it was going to be a little bit faster and, well, just a little bit faster. I mean, when it comes to grinding glass, I'm going to get this stuff over with as quick as possible. So now with this area kind of sanded down, now the next step I need to do is go ahead and I'm going to wipe it down using the Total Boat, the de-waxer and the surface prep. And then for mounting the knee, this is going to be kind of a two-part process. I'm going to end up mounting the knee tonight and then doing the glass work tomorrow. But for mounting the knee, I came up with at least what I consider to be kind of a clever little hack for getting the knee in place and holding it there while the epoxy cures. But we'll get into that here more in a second. Now, while I'm waiting for this to dry, as far as what type of epoxy to use for mounting this knee, there's a couple of options. For just as an example, if I wanted, I could come in and mix up some thickened epoxy, whether it's using the Total Boat 2-to-1 or the 5-to-1, just thicken that up with some Cabasil or some silica into like a peanut butter consistency. And then I'd be able to come in and just basically load up this edge right here, because this is the edge that's going to be mounting against the hull. I could just, pile up along this edge and then stick it in place. The other option, which is what I'm going to be going with, just because I think it's going to be a little bit cleaner and give me a little bit less waste, is where'd it go? Oh, I'm going to be using their Thixoflex, their flexible epoxy by Total Boat. And the reason for that is because this uses a nozzle or a tip. So I'll be able to come in and just basically apply a nice clean bead right along this edge, and it'll stay put. It's because it's already pre-thickened. I don't have to worry about any mixing, or if I made the mixture too thick or not thick enough, I don't have to worry about running out. I can just basically gun it right down along this edge, and it'll work perfect. Now, I have a partial tube of the Thixoflex here already, but It's been a few days since I've used this, and the epoxy inside this nozzle has already cured. And actually, this is the way you're supposed to store it. Whenever you're done using it, just leave the tip on, let everything cure, and then when you're ready to use it again, just basically unscrew the old one, throw it in the trash, and then screw on a new one. Now, whenever you put on a new tip, it's a really, really good idea to, for the first couple of inches that you actually gun out of here, it's a really good idea just to kind of consider that somewhat as a waste. Because sometimes what can happen, and I think it's mostly on brand new tubes, is that at least initially, when you first start pumping this out, sometimes it can be a little resin rich, or sometimes it can be a little hardener rich. So if you gun out 2, 3, 4 inches of material, by that time everything within the tube has kind of equalized, and it's now coming through the nozzle here at the correct ratio. So with that said, let's gun this out. Oops, I want to start right up in here actually. Now, before I actually stick this in place, I want to show you just real quick kind of a cheap and dirty little jig that I put together, just to make sure that when I install the knee, that it's actually coming down, I guess, perpendicular to this line right here. I don't want the knee coming down at any kind of an angle in either direction. I want it to come basically straight down, as close to a 90-degree angle as possible from here, so that when the side coverings are actually mounted, the mounting screws are going to be in a nice vertical line coming down straight off of the bottom part of this gunnel. And to do that, really all I did is I took a couple pieces of scrap pine, joined them together at the top here, and then on the back side here, I put a couple of little stoppers, or little feet here, I guess. And what I'm intending to do is to be able to situate this so that these little stoppers are going to rest on the underside of the gunnel here. And then essentially just kind of clamp it in place so that when I'm installing the knee, then I can basically sit in front of it and just kind of eyeball to make sure that the knee itself is coming down along this edge of this template, or of this guide. Now, for holding this in place while the epoxy cures, I'm going to be using some hot glue. And I'm going to put a dab here and a dab somewhere up in here. And that should, hopefully, hold it in place overnight while this all sets up. Now, the catch here, this hot glue sets up in probably 5 seconds. So after I put the dabs on here, I've got to move quick, get it in place and situated before the glue actually sets up. And if it does, well, I suppose then I got to peel it off and start over, do a cleanup and whatever. But hopefully that doesn't happen. This is actually a discontinued gun, but they have others that have taken its place. All right, so now we move. All right, so I've been sitting here holding this for about a minute, give or take. And the hot glue, it's pretty much tacked over. So in theory, I should be able to let go of this and have it stay put. So what I was trying to do here is, again, trying to line up these two edges here so that the knee itself is coming down parallel to this, well, my little wooden square here. And we've got good contact up on the top. And we got pretty decent squeeze out along the edges here. Now again, the epoxy that I just put in, this flexible epoxy, For the most part, that's really just there to kind of hold the knee in place while I'm glassing everything. So I don't want this thing shifting around, and I want to make sure that it stays put while I'm tabbing it in. So I don't need a whole lot of squeeze out, but the squeeze out that I do have, I'm going to clean that up right now while it's still soft and able to just get essentially just scraped off. It's a lot easier to scrape it off now than it would be tomorrow after it's set up. And so following day, just a real quick little story here. Now, remember last week when I was glassing over the knees on the workbench, and I kept on saying that, man, I wish I had a piece of plastic to lay over the table so that, minimize the risk of actually laminating all this stuff to my workbench. Well, turns out I actually had one. Wasn't aware of that at the time, but yeah, I actually had one. In the bottom of one of my work bags, I always kept an extra roll of a giant garbage bag, for doing cleanup when I was working in the marinas. Well, I completely forgot about it because it was an old work bag. So as I was going through and doing a little bit of cleaning, throwing some stuff away, I'm like, oh. So since then, I've ordered some more, obviously, and they'll be here by the end of the week. So hopefully, I'm not going to run into that problem again. But at least I've got one for today because today is really the day that I really need it. So as you can see here, the epoxy that we mounted this knee with, it's cured and it's set up and it's ready to go. Now, before I can start laying in the tabbing along the sides, as well as wrapping this front edge, I need to do a little bit of sanding, and I also need to round over this edge right here because glass trying to go over a 90-degree angle, that just doesn't work. So I've gotten that forward edge rounded over to, it's pretty close to about a 1/4 inch radius. So the glass should wrap around there pretty easily. Now, before we move on to the next step, which is going to be actually laying down the glass, I want to just kind of elaborate on something real quick because I'm pretty sure it's going to be a comment that's going to come up in the comment section down below here. And that is, I'm sure that it's going to come up that by installing these knees the way that I am, I'm going to be creating somewhat of a hard spot on the hull. And my understanding in what I've always seen as the actual hard spots on hulls has always come from basically a poor fit. I don't know if that makes sense here. I'll explain here. So let's just kind of say, just for an example, just because I think it'll be easiest to explain. So let's just say we're talking about a bulkhead, okay? Now, if you have your bulkhead cut out and you're sliding it into position. Now, by hand, if you're able to just slide it in, you've got a good clean fit all along the hull, along the top and the bottom. That's not creating a hard spot. Now, if you were to take that same bulkhead and if you were to try and slide it in and all of a sudden you get hung up, say a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch away from where the bulkhead really needs to be, and you take a mallet and you pound it into position, now you've created a hard spot, or specifically a pressure point. And it's those pressure points that can come back and create issues. So when you on some, I've had to fix boats that were done like this. But basically, if you ever when you're out in a marina or walking around in the yard, take a look down some of the sides of some of the boats. Just as they're sitting there resting. Every once in a while, you'll find one where you can see a very definitive line, or a bump out on the hull. That's a hard spot, but it's also technically a pressure point. That's from a bulkhead not fitting correctly and basically being forced into position. Now, that's not good. Okay, that can create problems. But in a situation like this, where each of these knees have a good fit, there really is no pressure point there because they're still able to move, in and out and flex with the hull. So being that we're about ready to start mixing up some resin, I've gone ahead and pre-cut all the fiberglass we're going to be needing. So in total, I've cut 6 pieces of 1708, and these sections are about 4 or 5 inches wide and about 16, 17 inches long, give or take. Now, as far as how many layers and where I'm going to be using them, I'm going to be doing 2 layers of 1708 on each side of the knee, tying the knee actually into the hull, as well as 2 more pieces coming around the forward bullnose edge of this knee. And the main reason I'm adding fiberglass along these forward edges of the knees is essentially because of the way that the mounting screws for what's going to eventually be the covers, the way that the mounting screws are actually going to be tapping into this. Now, it would be one thing if the screws were actually going in on face, because they would already be going through some glass, and as well as the glass that's inside or embedded in the coosa. However, when you're coming in, basically on an edge, on a cut edge, I am not sure how much glass or reinforcement is actually going to be there to, for the screw to bite onto. So again, maybe this may be somewhat of a belt and suspenders kind of approach, but so that's the main reason I'm adding glass along the forward edge, just so that when the mounting screws are going in, they're going to be able to tap into the coosa itself, but it's also going to have a little, about an 1/8 inch of fiberglass that the threads from the screws are actually going to be able to bite onto as well. So the resin I'm going to be using for creating the fillets as well as wetting out the glass, it's going to be the 2-to-1 epoxy made by Total Boat. Now they also make a 5-to-1 and that would work. But the 2-to-1, and I think I've mentioned this previously, the 2-to-1, it's a little bit thinner viscosity, so it's just going to be a little bit easier to completely wet out the glass and get it to conform to the profile here that we're going to be creating. Now polyester resin would be an option here as well, and it works very well with coosa. However, I want a little extra working time with this resin for getting the glass shaped and just getting it, doing all the finesse work, making sure it's cooperating and laying down correctly. So by using epoxy, I get a little bit longer working time than I would with using polyester resin. Now, shameless plug, just kind of throw this out there. If anybody is going into a project and they're not quite sure, should I use epoxy, should I use poly, what's compatible, what's not compatible with the different resins, if you have any questions about that, I do have a guide available on my website. It's available for download. Basically, it just kind of walks you through how to basically pick and choose which resin is going to be best for certain applications and specifically for particular areas of your project. So if you'd like to check that out, I'll have a link down below in the description where you can go ahead and just basically, check it over. If it's something you're interested in, great. If not, that's cool too. So before wetting out this fiberglass, I want to go ahead and create my fillets. And for doing that, I'm going to be basically mixing up some epoxy, and the additive that I'm going to be using for the thickener is Catasil, or, well, essentially it's silica. They're both the exact same thing. I'm not quite sure why they have two different names, but Catasil is essentially the same thing as silica. Now, although this is generally not recommended to do it this way, it's the way that I've always done it, just to save on some mixing time and be able to get the resin thick enough before the epoxy itself starts to set up on me. So according to literature, what's recommended is to basically do a thorough mix of your epoxy and the hardener, get that completely mixed, and then come in and start adding your additive. But when you're dealing with, say, thicker batches in here, this is a little over a 1/2 inch of material in the bottom here. If I were to go ahead and add in the hardener, mix that up, because it's so thick, it's going to start to generate heat. The more heat it generates, the faster this stuff sets up. So what I do on these, and this isn't a large pour, but so what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll get it thickened up about halfway, get about half of the thickening done, and then I'll add the hardener, give that a thorough mix, and then do the final bit of additives here to get it to the consistency that I want. Now, generally I'm going for a thickness that's a little bit thicker than peanut butter. I don't want this to kind of run off on me. Wherever I put it is where I want it to stay. And I should say, now that I'm seeing this, Catasil is extremely light and airy. So when you're dealing with this stuff, it's a really good idea to have your mask on. Okay, so for the first round of mixing, this is about the consistency that I'm looking for. Once I get to this point, now I'll add my hardener and then get that thoroughly mixed, and then I'll add some more silica to get it to that peanut butter consistency. That looks like a nice tight layup. I will take luck any day of the week. And with 1 down and 11 more to go, I think this is going to be a good place to end this video, because I seriously doubt anybody wants to watch this process 11 more times. So real quick, before I get into the closing here, I just want to give everybody a little bit of a heads up that I'm going to be taking next week off. So the next video coming out on YouTube will be published on September 1st, basically Labor Day weekend. And for as far as the Patreon schedule, I will be getting into that on Saturday's video, this coming Saturday. And I'll explain everything and just kind of give you guys, kind of the schedule that's going to be applying to you, because it's going to be much different than it is over on YouTube. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you found it helpful. And if you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to have you on board, and hit that little notification bell thing. That works evidently. And if you have any questions, comments, please leave those down below. I'll do my best to get back with you. And until next time, thanks for your time and thanks for watching.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.